They say every dog has its day. I never imagined that phrase would apply to me, but then again, I never imagined I'd be in the business of dogs. Not in this way. Not at this level. My name is Claire, and for the last 5 years I've run the Gilded Leash, a grooming and daycare service that is, to put it mildly, ridiculously exclusive. We cater to the city's 1%, the kind of people whose dogs have their own trust funds and more Instagram followers than a minor celebrity. Our lobby is furnished with custom velvet chaises, the water bowls are hand-thrown porcelain, and the air is scented with a proprietary blend of chamomile and lavender designed to calm even the most anxious purebred. I built this place from nothing, from a dream and a business loan that my parents had to co-sign, their nervous smiles doing little to hide their terror. I poured every ounce of my life into it, and it worked. It became a sanctuary, a quiet, fluffy, perfectly manicured monument to a very particular kind of urban success. But this story isn't about my success. It's about the moment it all threatened to come crashing down, and it's about a man named Arthur Vance. If you ever want to know a person's true character, don't look at how they treat their equals. Look at how they treat the people they pay to serve them. Arthur was a client, a notoriously successful and famously litigious corporate lawyer. His dog was a prize-winning standard poodle named Constantine, a creature so meticulously coiffed he looked less like an animal and more like an animated cloud of profound disappointment. Arthur thought his power in the courtroom and the boardroom extended everywhere. He thought it extended to my lobby. He believed that the rules, like paying his bills, were for little people. For months, he'd been a problem, a slow, creeping infection in my otherwise pristine operation. His payments became later and later, always accompanied by a breezy, dismissive excuse. His demands became more and more absurd. He was a master of the backhanded compliment, the subtle dig that made my staff feel small and made me feel like a servant. And then, he just stopped paying altogether. The invoices stacked up, first 1,000, then 3, then 7. It was a staggering amount for a small business, a hole in my budget that was starting to look like a crater. When I finally politely insisted on payment before his next booking, the niceties evaporated. The mask of civility fell away, and I was left staring into the cold, dead eyes of his entitlement. He threatened to sue me, not for breach of contract, not for anything logical. He was going to sue me, he said, his voice a low, menacing purr, for the emotional distress my facility had caused his precious Constantine. He claimed our substandard grooming had cost Constantine a blue ribbon at the Westchester Dog Show. It was a laughable, insane accusation, a phantom injury to a dog's ego, weaponized by a man who treated the law like his own personal hammer. He thought he had me, a small business owner, a young woman, against his legal empire. He was right, on paper. I had no recourse, or so he thought. He didn't know about the puppy cam. He didn't know that my obsession with security and transparency meant that for the past 6 months, a 4K, high-fidelity camera with crystal-clear audio had been recording 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And he didn't know that twice a day, every weekday, he would stand directly under one of its microphones, using the 10 minutes of drop-off and pick-up to have loud, indiscreet phone calls with his accountant. He didn't know that I had 6 months of him, in his own arrogant voice, cheerfully and meticulously detailing his strategies for felony tax evasion. He was about to learn that a dog's day can be very, very long, and I was about to have mine. If you've ever felt small, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been bullied by someone who thought they were untouchable, then stick around. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to deal with a nightmare client, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because you're going to want to hear how this ends. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't a bill or a friendly note. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, embossed with the name of a law firm, so powerful it sounded less like a legal practice, and more like a cabal of Bond villains. My hands felt cold as I slid it open with the silver letter opener I kept on my desk, a gift from a grateful client. The paper was heavy, the ink a severe black. It was a formal cease and desist, followed by a notice of intent to sue. The language was dense, impenetrable legalese, but the message was brutally simple. Arthur Vance was demanding, I forgive his entire outstanding balance of over $7,000. Furthermore, he was demanding an additional $50,000 in damages for Constantine's pain and suffering. It cited a litany of imagined slights, the psychological trauma of being placed next to a disturbingly energetic corgi, the use of a shampoo with a scent that was patently offensive to a dog of his breeding, and the crown jewel, the botched grooming that led to his public humiliation at the dog show. It was a work of pure fiction, a masterpiece of malicious invention. I read it twice, then a third time, and a strange, hollow feeling scooped out my insides. It was the feeling of being utterly powerless. The floor of my beautiful, sun-drenched office, a space I had designed to be my haven, suddenly felt like it was tilting beneath my feet. I sank into my chair, the heavy cream paper trembling in my hand. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an execution. He was going to bleed my business dry, not because he needed the money, but for sport, because he could, because it would reinforce his view of the world, that he was a giant, and everyone else was an ant, to be crushed underfoot without a second thought. The quiet, happy sounds of the daycare, the playful barks, the gentle hum of the air purifiers, the soft classical music I played for the animals, all of it faded into a dull, threatening roar in my ears. The world I had built was under siege. That first night was the worst. I sent my team home, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. My head groomer, Maria, hesitated at the door. Maria wasn't just an employee, she was the bedrock of the Gilded Leash. A woman in her late 40s with kind, knowing eyes and hands so skilled, they could soothe the most neurotic toy poodle into a state of zen-like bliss. She was a single mother, putting her son through college, and this job wasn't just a passion for her, it was a lifeline. She saw the letter on my desk. She saw the look on my face. She said, "Just tell me what you need, Claire." I just shook my head, unable to speak, and waved her away. I couldn't burden her with it. Not yet. I locked the door behind her, the click of the bolt echoing in the sudden, cavernous silence. The sun set, casting long, distorted shadows across the lobby. The velvet chaises looked like sleeping beasts. The porcelain water bowls gleamed like vacant eyes. I was alone in my silent kingdom, and I felt the walls closing in. The panic was a physical thing, a cold liquid rising in my chest. $7,000. I could, maybe, absorb that. It would hurt. It would mean delaying the new hydrotherapy tub I'd promised the team. It would mean a lean couple of months. But 50,000, that was a death blow. That was bankruptcy. That was lawyers' fees I couldn't possibly afford. A legal battle I couldn't hope to win. Arthur Vance didn't just have a legal team. He had an army. I had me. And my savings account, which suddenly looked laughably small, like a child's piggy bank, against a national treasury. I spent hours at my desk, my laptop open to my accounting software. The numbers swam before my eyes, a sea of black ink that was about to be drowned in red. I thought about the day I signed the lease on this place, the sheer terrifying thrill of it. I had been working as a groomer at a big box pet store, a place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. I saw how the animals were treated, like items on a conveyor belt. I saw how the owners were treated, like walking wallets. I just knew, there was a better way. My initial thought was pure, righteous fury. I should send this to the IRS. I should send it to the district attorney. I should burn his entire life to the ground. I imagined the fallout, the headlines, the investigation, the public disgrace. The satisfaction of it was a sweet, intoxicating nectar. But as I sat there, listening to his confident, condescending voice, another thought began to form, a colder, more strategic one. If I sent this to the authorities, it would become their investigation. It would be out of my hands. It would be a public spectacle, and my business, my clients, my life would be caught in the splash zone. It would be messy and unpredictable, and more importantly, it wouldn't solve my immediate problem, the $50,000 lawsuit that was hanging over my head like a guillotine. This wasn't about justice, I told myself. clutching at a reason that felt less like vengeance. It wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. This recording wasn't a weapon of mass destruction, it was a shield, it was leverage. I needed advice. I couldn't go to a lawyer of my own. Arthur Vance was too well connected. He would have eyes and ears in every major firm in the city. Any inquiry I made could get back to him. But then I thought of Eleanor Vance. No relation to Arthur, thank God. She was a client, a quiet, elegant woman in her 70s, who brought in her two ancient, sleepy West Highland Terriers twice a week. I knew from her client intake form that she was a retired judge. Not just any judge, she had sat on the federal appellate court. She was sharp, discreet, and she had always treated me with a profound, gentle respect. She saw the gilded leash not as a service, but as a well-run enterprise. She appreciated the details. I decided to take a calculated risk. The next time she came in, I asked if I could have a moment of her time. I led her to my office and offered her a cup of tea. I didn't show her the evidence. I didn't mention Arthur by name. I framed it as a hypothetical. I have a friend, I began, who runs a small business. She has a client who is refusing to pay a very large bill and is threatening a frivolous lawsuit. My friend is in a difficult position, but hypothetically, what if my friend had come into possession of information that the client would very much not want to become public, information that is, shall we say, legally compromising for him? I was careful with my words. Eleanor listened patiently, her intelligent eyes fixed on my face. She didn't interrupt. When I was finished, she took a slow sip of her tea. Her gaze was unreadable. She said, "This country has very complicated laws regarding the expectation of privacy. Audio recording is a particularly thorny issue. One-party consent, two-party consent. It varies by state. It can be a legal minefield." A feeling of dread washed over me. Had I miscalculated? She continued, her voice even. However, if there were, say, clearly posted signs on the premises, in multiple locations, explicitly stating that all activities, including audio, were being recorded for security purposes, a reasonable person might have a very difficult time arguing they had a legitimate expectation of privacy. A judge might conclude that a person who chooses to have a sensitive conversation in such an environment has only themselves to blame for the consequences. It's a debatable point, of course. A clever lawyer could argue it either way. It would all come down to the specific circumstances. She was giving me plausibly deniable advice. She was telling me, without telling me, that my footing was solid, but not absolute. It was a nuanced gray area, which was perfect. A gray area was something a man like Arthur Vance, a man who dealt in the black and white of legal threats, would hate. Uncertainty was not his friend. Then she looked me directly in the eye. Her voice dropped slightly. "Your friend," she said, "should be very careful. Information like that is a form of power, and power can be used to build, or it can be used to destroy. She needs to decide what her goal is. Is it to win a war, or is it simply to end the battle so she can have peace?" That was the question. I had the power to destroy him, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was to get him out of my life, to protect what I had built, to restore the balance. The final piece of the plan clicked into place. I wasn't going to go to the IRS. I wasn't going to go to a prosecutor. I was going to go to Arthur. The plan was not a declaration of war. It was a quiet coup, executed with the precision of a surgeon. The first step was to prepare the package. I didn't want a mountain of evidence. I wanted a single, perfect, undeniable exhibit. I spent an entire day editing the audio. I compiled the most damning snippets from the 6 months of recordings into a single 5-minute audio file. It was a highlight reel of his felonies. I started with the discussion of the Curaçao framework, moved on to the fraudulent charitable foundation, included a bit about the yacht, and ended with a particularly cheerful segment where he and Bernard laughed about how they were going to outsmart the clowns at the IRS. For the 3rd year in a row, it was a symphony of self-incrimination. I then had the audio professionally transcribed by an anonymous online service, paying in cryptocurrency to maintain absolute anonymity. I received a perfectly formatted time-stamped document that read like a court exhibit. The final package contained a single, unmarked USB drive holding the audio file and a printed copy of the transcript. There was no note, no threat, no explanation, just the evidence, stark and cold. The second step was the delivery. I couldn't just mail it. That felt too impersonal, too easily dismissed. I needed to ensure it landed with the right impact. I decided to send 2 identical packages, one to Arthur Vance at his law firm, addressed to him personally, the other, and this was the crucial part, to his accountant, Bernard, at his office. I wanted them both to receive it at the same time. I wanted them to know that the other knew. I wanted to sow chaos and distrust between them. Who had talked? Who had leaked? I hired a bonded, professional courier service, again paying in cash. I gave them specific instructions: deliver both packages simultaneously on Thursday morning at exactly 10 a.m. Do not leave them with a receptionist. They must be handed directly to the addressee. The third and final step of my first move was the simplest, and perhaps the most powerful.